right, so it seems that we've started our recording. So welcome back everybody from your carnival break, sort of like a spring break kind of thing. Um, Hoping everybody is healthy, given what was the activities that you may or may not have gotten up to. So today we're looking at chapter one of the Exploring Leadership textbook. Um, but before we start looking at the actual chapter itself, we're going to start looking at some of the course elements. So if you've been able to go through the course description or the course outline, you'd recognize that this is not meant to be, or it's meant to be simply an introductory course into leadership and governance. It's something that it takes a long time. In fact, for those of you who may have had a leadership training before, you'd realize that there are people with masters and PhDs in this area. So it's something that we could look at. So the course is going to focus, if you remember the assignments, is going to focus on your experience um, with the material that we're going to be looking at, and especially from your own reflections on the issues that we're going to be looking at. So here is going to focus on your personal experiences with leadership or with other leaders, and we're going to look at that through your self-analysis document that you're going to be working up. We also, in that self-analysis, we're going to be exploring your personal and leadership value structure. All of those things will be part and parcel of the exploration. So this course description, personal and leadership assessment, self-assessment, and values exploration. That's another element. One of the other couple of assignments will be treating with that. Application of the tools of leadership and ethical decision making. There's an assignment attached to this, which is one of the reasons why I'm pointing it out. But let's look at the course outline, objectives, understanding the theories, defending decision making. All of these are generally the regular stuff. Create a plan that applies the concept of good governance. So that's the final assessment there that we're doing in terms of the reflections and leadership plan that comes in with that. Um, we're going to be putting you into teams in various different activities for you to be able to practice some stuff, practice on your group work and that kind of stuff. We're going to be looking at issues of leadership in our context. And here we have probably the most lofty course objective is display and modify behaviors indicative of a personal philosophy of positive leadership and ethics. Now, the first question I want to ask about is with this thing here is how many of you all understand the concept of behavior modification? And if anybody here is willing to share on the types of behavior modification activities that you've engaged in or been um, or have been utilized on yourself in the past. Anybody willing to share? I don't want to call on people, but it'd be nice if people are willing to volunteer. Christopher, have you ever been engaging in behavior modification? What do you think it is?
So I actually have been engaging in it because having been in a position of leadership, then I had to become the leader as opposed to just being a follower.
All
So I
right.
had to modify my behavior to become that person.
All right. And how did you go about making that modification or those modifications?
Well, those modifications came from influences that were around in terms of my boss and people in a higher position than I was, and I was trying to emulate their behaviors as
All
a
right.
manager.
Okay. All right. I think Shivanan had his hand up.
Yes, sir.
Right. Go ahead. You can make your contribution as well.
Right. So I was just thinking that my regular attitudes at home and amongst my family and friends and stuff versus when I go into work or go into like the hospital institutions, that I changed my behavior to be more professional because, you're in the public eyes and the public is always looking at you.
right? You're in a position of customer service relations, that type of stuff that is very visible, and therefore they want a particular type of behavior. Now, the question here is really what has stimulated that behavior modification? Now, if we think back as children, a lot of times behavior modification was achieved in us through punishment or through a rewards or punishment system. Now, how many mothers are there or parents are there in class today? And by a show of hands, you just put your hands up if you are, right. Are you sure? Are you sure? Since you're the first person, have you ever used that with your children? Unknown users also there. That's Jameen. Have you ever used?
Yes,
What do
yes,
you
sir.
use? Yeah. What do you use? Negative reinforcement or positive reinforcement?
It depends on how he behaves. I have one son, he's 7,
Right.
and if it is he behave naughty, so to put it, I
Right.
will punish him in the sense, let him know he wouldn't be able to access his tablets or any gaming device, stuff like these things.
All right. Okay, that's interesting. I see Laurel and Jermaine want to make contributions. So, Laurel, Miss
Mother
Hunt.
and a grandmother.
Uh huh.
So as a mother, I realized that using negative correction did not work very well on my daughter. So I had to find other ways to get through to her.
All right.
And my grandson, his temperament, he we use a mix of both positive and negative. Depends on how he reacts and the situation that is happening. But
Right.
usually we try to do more of the positive than the negative. Negative only comes in if positive isn't working.
All right. Good. Now, how many of you all in the past? I know the unknown user, that's Jermaine. She was wanted to make a contribution as well. But in the past, especially the older ones among us, have experienced behavior modification through um, corporal punishment. Let's see. By a show of hands, who get licks?
I feel the whole class had to put up their hands here.
That is so true.
The
Oh
millennials,
God,
the
sorry.
millennials will have received Alex.
Yeah, that's true.
All
And
the millennials, we get Alex come up.
yeah, we can kind of tell people age by that thing. Thank you for the show of hands, guys. That was excellent. Now, obviously, I can't use well, the problem with negative forms of behavior modification or what we call negative reinforcement is that the stimulus for the behavior change, the behavioral change, is external to you. Shivadan, you see your hand still up? You wanted to add something? No? Okay, just hand
No,
it
sorry
up.
about that. Sorry about that.
That's okay. But the reason that I'm bringing this up is because I can't use negative reinforcement with you because more than likely the behavioral modification that we're looking for is not something that in the context of the course I can measure in terms of real time after the fact kind of thing. But the idea here is that um, we want to utilize what we call internal motivations for your behavioral changes because those are the ones that tend to stick with us longer than the ones in which the behaviors that are changed based upon external stimulus like punishment or having people looking at us and there's some sort of punitive measure attached to a negative action that we see. The internal motivation is what we are hoping will take place in this course for you to be able to want to personally make these changes, um, that we that the model here will perceive as positive leadership and ethical behaviors that we're going to be looking at. So this is a very lofty objective for any course to effect behavioral changes. Most times behavioral changes is something that we look for by the end of a program, not just one course. But we're going to be looking to see this having that cumulative effect upon you. But it sounds like a lot of you have already started to experience behavior modification based upon the types of training that you're engaging in the course and the course content of your programs. So this is good. This will just reinforce what you're possibly doing already. Okay, so we talked already about the two textbooks that we're utilizing. For this, they're available for download on the e-classroom. So let's start to look at Unit 1 here now. Unit 1 is focused on leadership in the modern world, and it's going to focus on what the leadership issues are and the leadership practices are in the current environment. Now, because these textbooks are both US based in origin, we need to bring the Caribbean experience to the fore here, because we don't have reliable local textbooks that utilize the systems that we have here. So we're going to be utilizing our own observations of leadership in practice in Trinidad and Tobago in particular. We have some individuals in class from other countries here, which we'll be looking at their input from their countries. So we're looking at, how leaders behave in the context around the Caribbean environment. It is important, therefore, for us to remember that we always have to look at what's happening here, because we're not going to find a reliable textbook that we can utilize that will examine what's taking place here, especially from our own perspective. Because in a lot of instances, some of the textbooks that we've come across, although they were examining leadership in or leaders in the Caribbean and the Latin American context, it is written from the perspective of somebody from the West, or from North America or Canada, or some European country, where they are analyzing what they're seeing, and therefore we need to have our own view of what's taking place. So it's going to be important for us to be making that comparison throughout the program. We have to bring this element in to it for us to be able to really look at it from that perspective. Anyway, moving along. When we start to look at the model, or as we are starting the examination of the model, any model starts with a definition. And this model defines leadership as a relationship and ethical process of people together attempting to accomplish positive change. So the focal point is that leadership is defined as a relationship. Now, one of the things that you could draw to your attention here would be when when you evaluate the people that you have worked with in the past, what was the nature of the relationship that you had with those individuals? So if you've had poor relationships with your leaders and superiors in job sites, or even among with teachers and stuff, you'd realize that your performance in that particular subject matter, or your performance at that job, may not be a good performance, or one that you want to relive or recapture all the time, because the nature of the relationship that you had with that leader or supervisor was a poor relationship. But the ones that you had a good relationship with, there was a tendency for you to be to have better outcomes. So one of the ways we can look at this is your experience with teachers. Um, how many of you all have had positive results coming out of subject material where there was a good relationship, as opposed to observing what took place in hindsight now with lecturers or teachers in your past who you had very poor relationships with, or just marginal relationships with, what was the outcome for you? And 9 times out of 10, I believe most of you all might feel, or might see the correlation between the relationship or the quality of the relationship or the type of relationship you've had with that teacher and the results that you have with the subject material. Um, can anybody give me a for instance, or would agree with that statement? People like maybe Jada or um, Kaylee. What about you guys? How do you all feel about that statement?
So I think it's really true because when I was getting advice from my lecturer, he was watching the difference between my grades in econ comparatively to other subjects. And to me, it showed me that once you have a better relationship with uh, authoritative figure, which is yourself, you tend to
Mm-hmm.
perform way better than somebody you don't have that close of a relationship. So to me, it's true.
All right, that's good. I saw somebody had their hand up earlier. Thank you, Katie. Somebody's hand went up. No,
That's me,
Jada.
sir.
All right, go ahead.
Yes. So this is secondary school.
Mm,
Based off my
mm-hmm.
um past with that, it's between my I did theater and then I could teach in math. I had a wonderful relationship with my theater teacher, and I
Right.
could not stand my math teacher.
Typical. Yeah. That happens a lot when you have a poor relationship. It also impacts upon your performance in the subject in a negative manner as well. I have to say that in my lifetime I've had that experience as well. Um, and regardless of how difficult the subject was, it was made much easier when you had a better open relationship with the person with whom you were engaging with. It helped to make difficult subjects much easier to handle, and you felt as if the person actually cared about you, and that's an important element that we're going to explore in this model that we're looking at here. All right, so when we talk about leadership, thank you for your contribution, guys. um, we talk about leadership. One of the first things that comes to mind is the political sphere. So when we talk about leadership in the context of political sciences, what we're looking at is we're focusing on power and influence. How do we arrive in positions of power, and how do we use that power to influence people around us, or people in our environment? Now, if we look at this picture here, we can see, um, you all know who these people are, right? These are individuals who are at uh, arguably the most powerful people, leaders in the world around us in the political sphere. And each one of these leaders have these positions of power because of the status that their countries have in the world's geopolitical environment. Now, if we were to break this down to the local environment, who can we put in instead of these individuals here? Which three individuals do you focus on in Trinidad and Tobago that we could put in this picture instead? Who could be subbing? Come on, Alana.
Winston depends.
Who? Laurel, go ahead. From our current scenario, let's put it that way.
Rowley
Right. So
Montana.
if we're talking about say like our present administration,
Yes, our president.
I would
Yeah.
say I would say Terence Singh for members and the Honorable Prime Minister,
All right. All right. That's
in
fine.
my opinion.
In your opinion. So I can see Dr. Rowley being there. Yes. What about the opposition member? Would they be there? Anybody from the opposition? Because you're
Me,
talking about the
of
entire political environment, huh? Both the
opposition
left and the
leader at
right.
present does not have enough of a powerful stance as previously.
Uh-huh.
It seems that public opinion is as a that she's basically lost the power that she did have, and she's lost a lot of respect.
All right. So you would put all the members, well, key members from the current ruling party into this position. Where would the president of the republic fall into this picture? With you?
Yep.
No?
So,
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, go ahead.
If I was to, okay, see that I'm not from Trinidad,
Right, good.
so
Good.
maybe controversial. So we will put for the government, call him board, Ral Alfawari,
Mm.
Kid Rowan.
All right.
Opposition, we name Bharat Abra Thousands. um,
Well,
Kamala,
what about your country?
Amulilam.
All right. What about your country?
Well, in Semesu, you have put Ralph.
All right. Wow, he's still around?
Yes, yes.
Wow. Okay.
Camilo, his son.
Uh-huh.
There's one named Saboto Caesar.
All right. Okay, I hear you. And you all use a similar democratic system, right?
Yes, similar.
Westminster system as well.
You
All
was
right.
similar.
Right. Good, good. You see, Laurel, I see your hand still up. Is it that you want to add something?
I down. I don't know.
No? Okay. All right. Let's look at this set of these individuals here. This is the G20 summit that took place in 2023. This was last year, late last year. What is the function of a summit like this? The function of a summit like this is to bring the world's most influential leaders together. 20 biggest nations, most important nations together, to streamline their their policies in relation to, um, in this case here, they were focusing on climate and climate change and other sort of trade things. Now, this is why these countries get together, and you know this is not every country in the world. There's a different organization that has that. That's the UN, and when they have those types of meetings, you'd recognize that there's a lot of that there is a lot of people who get upset, and when you go to these conferences or these summits, you'd find that there's a lot of protesters, and that's simply because the individuals in our society don't think that these countries are doing enough to ward off the issues of climate change and the types of negative things that they're doing. And that's part of the responsibility. When we look at the political environment, what we're hoping is that these people that we elect into positions of power or who arrive or get into positions of power help to solve the problems that we face in the country and by extension the rest of the world. All right. So that's when we talk about power, this is what we're referring to. Because in our environment, we are hoping that our leaders in our local environments, our political leaders, help to find solutions for the problems that we face on an everyday basis. Okay? So another framework in which we look at leadership through is through the lens of management. So when we talk about management, we're talking about corporate activities, and what we're looking for here is we're looking for an outcome driven activity where the relationship between supervisors and subordinates is is measured through the achievement of the various outcomes of the organization. At the end of the day, therefore, it means that what they're looking for is for private sector in particular, high levels of efficiency and high levels of profit margins. So if we look at these people here, this groups of photographs here, you'd recognize that a lot of them are very rich individuals. How many of you all recognize these individuals? Or some of them, not all. Hmm. Good. And if you look at them carefully, you'd realize that all of these people, all of these individuals, have at one time or the another um, risen to positions of power measured through the amount of wealth they have acquired. And that's one of the most critical things that we utilize in terms of measuring the effectiveness of leaders in management positions, their ability to take a company, take an idea, build it up, and make as much profit out of it as possible. All right, so that's another framework through which we look at leadership. Another view that we engage in looking at leadership is through anthropology. And anthropology is where we examine the 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 way in which societies in the past, in our not too distant past and sometimes even further back, we look at how leadership developed there by examining what was left behind and what we know about their cultures from them. So, for example, they will try to examine what we know of the culture and what influences the culture, the languages they use, the tools that they developed, such and whatever symbols and um, organizations that they developed, and what type of ethical values that they or practices that they engaged in. So sometimes we engage in think about this film Apocalypto that Mel Gibson had done. Any of you all looked at that film Apocalypto? Yes, no, show of hands. Nobody looked at Apocalypto. Wow. All right, so that's homework. Huh? So go and find that film on thing and look at it. Apocalypto examine the world before the arrival, just before the arrival of Columbus to the New World. And it was this story, for those of you who may or may not remember, story yeah, followed events that took place in South America with a tribe that was conquered by another tribe, or I should say, the story emerges around this, and the story focuses on the struggles of one individual who was attempting who was captured as a slave, and this will come up as the Mayan culture, and those slaves were being taken to be executed as part of their worship of the sun god.
Is that
um,
the movie Apocalypto, sir?
Yep, that's the movie
Yeah,
Apocalypto.
I've seen it. I've seen it.
All right, so that's what I'm hoping. The idea there is that this was a more extensive exploration of the world there, and you'd recognize that in each one of those communities, the way in which somebody rose to a leadership position was different. So, for example, in the small tribe that was living in the forest, the person who rose to a leadership position was the best hunter, the strongest person there, who was the best hunter in the group. Not necessarily the strongest person, but the person who could provide the most amount of food and had the best techniques for doing hunting and so on. Whereas in the Mayan community, which was the larger community, their leaders emerged in two areas in terms of warriors, the strongest warriors who were able to capture the most amount of slaves and who were really good at killing people, and then the religious leaders who were at the apex of that society, where they were supposed to be in conversation with God. So it was a very interesting examination of a society from the past. The question would be is that if we were to look at if we were to kind of put ourselves um, 2 or 3,000 years into the future, what would we find in the form of evidence of our culture, tools, and that type of stuff that they would find out about our society today in terms of leadership and in terms of the way in which we run our lives? What do you all think we'd find if we were anthropologists who had come back in history, or we were excavating um, civilization that existed in the 2024, but we're in let's say um, what would it be, 4024, 5024, or some time back, a couple of hundred years or a couple of thousand years in the future, looking back, what do you think we'd find that would tell them about our society today? What do you think we'd find? What are some of the key um, tools that they would locate with us here in the world? Can you think? What is indicative of our cultures today? I think I have my camera off.
So
Uh-huh.
I would definitely say that technology, like laptops,
Laptops and
that type of thing.
smartphones and stuff like that. Yep, yep.
Yeah,
More than
videos
likely
and that type.
they'll find a whole pile of those things all over the place, and they'll find dead bodies holding on to them for dear life. What about our leadership? How did we arrive at how did people arrive in leadership positions in our society? What do you think they'd find? They'd find evidence of some sort of electoral situation, democratic situation taking place in one part of the world as opposed to other parts of the world that had different systems. Yeah? Would that make sense?
Yes,
They'll
sir.
also find, yeah, they'll also find that in the whole environment, you have different linguistics taking place all around. Some countries English bound, others are Spanish, others different countries, different languages, that type of stuff. All right. So again, the idea here is through anthropology we can look backwards at societies and evaluate the nature of leadership in those societies. That's going to be important. All right. So another framework through which we look at leadership is through history. And when we talk about history, we're looking at um, important people who arise in significant time frames in our world, um, and sort of lead major social movements. So let's see how many of these you can identify. What what event are these four individuals best known for, or groups of events you see these people being noted for? Oh, excuse me. Any of y'all recognize these individuals?
Yes, sir. But to think about it, from the time I only see Adolf Hitler, most people would think about war, the concentration camps and stuff.
Right.
I'm not sure if the second one is Winston Churchill.
Which one?
I
You
can't
want me
remember.
to
The
the
second one
bola?
with the hat,
Well, you have two people with hats there. The military hat or the non-military hat?
non-military hat.
Right. So that's Winston Churchill, right? Who was he?
Um, I'm not so down into the history, but I would have heard this name come up a few times while watching documentaries and stuff.
Right.
But to say, I'm trying to figure out like, wait, is you're asking about these characters again?
What event brought these guys together? Because remember, we're looking at this from a historical point of view.
The
What
only thing come
event?
to my mind is war.
Which
World War
war?
Two.
World War Two. That's what we're looking for.
Yeah.
Because it was World War Two in which these three countries or these three individuals got together to defeat Adolf Hitler. And then after that, a whole set of other things took place, and that this guy over here, if anybody recognizes him, this is Joseph Stalin. He was the leader of the Soviet Union, and that was where. And after World War II, you had the Cold War develop with Winston Churchill and Roosevelt here, who started to kind of turn their back on Joseph Stalin because of the nature of the leadership was there. So you had after World War II, you had other events that eventually came up, and the Cold War and all that sort of stuff that took place. But the primary reason why these people were featured during this time frame has to do with the getting rid of Adolf Hitler and his program. Another part of the war that we did that's not captured here is the war in Japan that was primarily featuring the U.S. and the Japanese, because the Japanese were the ones who struck the first blow, and then of course the United States went on to drop some atomic bombs on Japan based upon what they were dealing with there. All right, so so from a historic point of view, here we're talking about the emergence of these individuals into leadership positions based upon the events that were rolling out at that point in time in that thing. Anybody recognizes this individual?
Yes, sir. Is Martin Luther King.
Yeah, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.,
That's right.
unfortunately, right? And what movement was he a part of from a historic point of view?
The Black Rights Movement.
Well, the Americans call it the American Civil Rights Movement. All right. Okay. All right. So cool. What about this gentleman? Anybody knows him? Now, I'm purposely using an older photo of the gentleman. Anybody? Anybody recognize the name Stokely Carmichael
Mm.
or Kwame Ture? No? All right. So Stokely Carmichael was a Trinidadian living in the United States. In fact, he got a scholarship to go to school there. And while he was there,
Oh yeah, before he got shot. He got shot down.
did he?
It had a Trinidadian who went to America. He got a scholarship and he got shooted because of his color. I don't know if
Right?
it's the same story.
Mm-hmm. Sounds familiar. Did have any of you all ever looked at a film called The Black Klansman? No?
Nah, sir, I don't think so. I'll write it down.
Right.
I'll take a look.
Yeah, try and find that movie. The Black Klansman actually features this gentleman. His name, he started off life with the name Stokely Carmichael. He was a Trinidadian, went to the United States on scholarship and was attending school there. And he became involved with the civil rights movement and was eventually became one of the leaders in the Black Power movement, which he then eventually brought across to Trinidad, which led to the uh, Black Power riots in the 1970s here in Trinidad as well. His influence was seen across there. The movie I'm
Uh,
talking about is he changed his name at when he got involved with the Black Power movement from Stokely Carmichael, which they say which he they all indicated that was his slave name, and he chose the name Kwame Ture as his African name to show allegiance to his African origin. Um, Sort of like what Malcolm X did when he changed his name from Malcolm Small to Malcolm X, um, to make a point about the history of the world based on that. And he had influence. So if you ever get the chance, look at the Black Klansman. It is a film that features the unlikeliest thing to happen, which is a black guy was able to join the the Ku Klux Klan, and they through him and the work of another undercover agent, they were able to infiltrate the Ku Klux Klan and prevent um, an assassination attempt on this gentleman here, Kwame Ture, or Stokely Carmichael, back in the 70s. A nice film for you all to look at because it kind of, it's not the focus. He's not the focus of the film, but he is the key person that the organization is looking at executing as an example of white power versus black power, that type of stuff. All right, so it's interesting that he's featured in that light there. Another film that features another notorious Trinidadian is any of you all ever saw the Bank Job with Jason Statham? No, that one features another militant individual in West Indian society from Trinidad again, but he was operating in England at the time of this Black Power movement rise. A guy called Malik, Jamal Malik. Um, he was. You should look at that movie because it puts a different spin on what Malik was doing and how he got involved with certain things. But it's quite interesting to look at different people's interpretation of different individuals in our history. All right, so if we look at this picture here, which has a number of different influential people in history, hopefully you can see some of the. All right, how many of these individuals do you recognize? And can link the events with them. Now, we already spoke about Adolf Hitler and the rise of Nazism. This is Winston Churchill and the World War II. This is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He's involved with World War II as well as this guy here, FDR. He's also associated with that. But what of the other people that I hear? How many people do you recognize? Now there's some that you may not. In fact, I still haven't figured out who this guy is here. Um, but can you recognize other people and tell me what you think they are associated with? How many people recognize this gentleman here? Anybody?
I
All
can't
right.
remember his full name, but that is
With this guy
Neil
here?
Armstrong or something.
No, the guy up
The
here is Neil
astronaut.
Armstrong. The astronaut is Neil Armstrong. Yes, cool.
Which one you're pointing to?
I'm pointing to. Are you seeing my mouse circling like that? Let's see if I can.
Kind of glitchy.
Look like
Sorry.
Walt Disney.
Walt Disney, right? And the importance of him is what? The emergence of animation and children's entertainment becoming a major um, movement in television and the movies, right? Because with him we got the first. Um, all right, what about this lady up here? This nun up at the top.
I don't know. She looks like Mother Teresa.
That's who she is. Yes. What is she associated with? Remember, she led the development of a particular set of nuns who gave up any kind of ostentatious life to give back to um, the poor and helpless in society. That's what she's involved with. This gentleman here is also related to the World War II, but he's positioned next to this gentleman here, and they have a very particular relationship. This is Joseph Stalin, and this is Lenin. no, Karl Marx, sorry, and they are associated with the emergence of the communist system of government and the emergence of the Soviet Union. What about this guy on the corner over here? Who's that? That's Mahatma Gandhi, associated with the peaceful protest movements that a lot of other people adopted, and but is associated with the independence of India, and then unfortunately following that the separation of India and Pakistan. So you have a whole. What about these guys down here? These are influential history people. Anybody
That's for
recognize
music.
them? That's for music, fine, but who are they?
Elvis.
When you recognize Elvis,
All right, so the
Elvis and Beatles.
right, so this is the Beatles, these four boys here, and Elvis Presley. They are influential individuals in the development of music, in particular, the emergence of rock and roll and rock music and popular music coming out of the 60s into the 70s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and also their influence can still be felt today. Marilyn Monroe here, she was um, the starlet kind of ideology started to come up with her. The gentleman in the middle here is a kind of weird guy. That's um um oh god, what's his name? Booth, the guy who assassinated Kennedy. Not Kennedy. Lincoln. So old picture of him there. This is Teddy Roosevelt, who was associated with the emergence of the United States as a world power coming out of um, the war Spanish succession, um, the Spanish American War that was fought along the Mexican lines down there. It was important there. Then you have Ronald Reagan and this gentleman here, Castro. All right, they are synonymous with the development of the United States and its dominance in the 80s. And Castro is important in terms of the emergence of the socialist system that emerged in Cuba. Then you have this gentleman here. This is Mr. Mandela. And the guy next to him is Cecil Roach. These guys are associated with well, the emergence and then the end of apartheid. Um, these are individuals that were significant during those period of time. Then you have Margaret Thatcher here. She was the associated with the um, at the time the very um, privatization of state or popularization of state um, privatization programs that a lot of the labor movement people get annoyed with. So much so that she was known as the witch. Any of you all familiar with that? Um, these two guys down here are the opposite ends of the spectrum of the Soviet Union. Gorbachev here actually was one of the last leaders where they transitioned out of the communist system and into the um, the democratic system. He was one of the last leaders there, as opposed to this gentleman here, who was one of the key leaders at the time when Ronald Reagan was in power. Um, he is called Khrushchev, and he was really adamant they wanted that they were at the height of the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union, and the whole system that took place there. All right, so that's a lot about the history elements there that we spoke about. Now, one of the last areas that we look at leadership through is through psychology and sociology, because psychology would look at individuals and sociology would look at those individuals behaving in groups. And we'll start to look at the trying to understand why certain individuals may rise into um, leadership potential, or show leadership potential, and how the society um, looks at that. So when we look at them, we're going to be examining the work of a number of these theories that is going to come up, and we're going to focus a lot on behavioral theorists such as this is Freud, this is Karl Marx here. We're also going to be looking at some of his work as well. And we're going to be looking at this gentleman here, B.F. Skinner. You may not recognize him, but he's really important with adult education and, well, education in general. I'm going to be utilizing a fair amount of stuff that he was able to develop as a psychologist or sociologist. So these are some of the different leadership theories we're going to be looking at throughout the course. Um, we have to look at all of them, and a lot of them sit upon work that comes from these gentlemen here, that guides us through the development of the process. So that leads us to a question is, how does either your field of study approach leadership, and how do you look at leadership? Now, those are questions that you should be making part of your analysis, your self-analysis, because the questions are going to ask you about what do you feel about leadership, what are your potential for leadership, and so on, and how has it changed from the beginning of the course to the end of the course, that type of stuff. So you should be examining how you feel leadership works in your area of study, and how you generally feel leadership works in and around your life. um, those are things that you're going to have to pay attention to. So for example, how many of you all follow any sort of social so what do they call it, influencers, what do you call it, social media influencers? Any of you all follow those individuals, or have any social media influencers in your, I don't know, you're following on YouTube or Instagram or whatever the thing is? Anybody? You don't follow people?
No, not really. The only influence I have is Jesus himself.
Is who? Sorry, Shivana?
Jesus.
Right, but that's still an influence. All right, and that's from your personal perspective. But Shivanan, what field of work are you involved in?
Well, thinking about the leadership course that we're doing and seeing that I'm in the radiology program, the only thing that I'm taking away from this is the behavioral um,
Aspect.
attitude, yeah, the behavioral aspect when I go into work, because it's more a what's the word I'm looking for?
It has to do with the relationships you develop and your
Just
treatment
yeah,
of other people,
we
right?
work we work more individually, and we don't really have that leadership role unless there's a problem. We just go to the head of the department.
Right. Now let me ask you about that. How does that person arrive in that position as a head of department?
I believe it is that they have to be able to understand the entire organization of the department they are running, have the certifications, which will show their um,
Skill
competency in
levels.
running the department, their skill, yeah.
And they have to spend some time.
Yeah, they also have to have the
Right.
experience working in department so they know how
There you go.
everything runs.
So that's what I mean. How does your field of study approach leadership? It's a combination of what we call meritocracy, right? So it's a combination of certification and experience that is giving you access into leadership roles within the field of study, and which makes sense, yeah, because radiology is a type of skill-based activity.
Right.
It's going to take time to build your skills. It's also going to take time for you to acquire your certification, more importantly, um, and put that certification into practice. And because you're dealing with people in an individual nature and sometimes in a small group activities, it's going to require you having some psychological, sociological leadership skills to be able to work with others. All right. So those are the kind of that's the kind of influence that happens there. Alana, are you able to open your mic and talk, Miss Smith?
Yes, please. Good
Right.
evening.
What's your field of study?
Environmental health.
Say again. Sorry.
Environmental health.
Right. Do you work in the public sector or the private sector? Excuse me with the coughing there.
The public.
Public sector. Now, how do people? Now, do you work in the field of environmental health, or are you working in a different area?
And the different area. I work at the
Okay.
hospitals.
Right. So, how do people arrive in administrative roles in your field?
Just based on experience.
No qualifications
And
necessary.
no, it's actually not even in my field. The entirety of most of the departments is based on experience and service.
All right. So
So like, yes,
it's seniority then.
yes, seniority.
Wow.
And so I have a big problem with that because I was transferred to another department. And being under the first department I was in, I spent 10 days, 10 years there, and the head of department was on point. And
Uh huh.
meaning, to start any issues arise, she would be able to solve it, come up with solutions, make a difference, make an impact, and get the department as where it is to be in a positive tone. However, when I was transferred to another department, I could have tell that the current manager I had no experience at all and didn't know that what they were doing.
Right.
Because of the experience I had with the first manager. And to me, I find that was an issue because I'm in another department now and the same thing is going on. No
Right.
managerial skills, just based on seniority, and they push you there, not even if you have a diploma, certificate in any managerial position, and they just expect you to lead, and half of them do not know how to lead. And
Right.
that's just my take on it. I
That
think
kind
they should
of.
have some kind of certificate or some experience. If you do, send them on a little course, internally.
Well, they're supposed to, because in-house training is supposed to be part of the process that is utilized for promotion. Um, but unfortunately, it has a lot. Well, the public sector is such that a lot of times it's really about who you know in the political structure that can assist you in getting promotions. So yes, you're right that in a lot of public sector administration, there is no at this current time, there's very little emphasis placed upon qualification, but more on time, the amount of time served, which
True,
is
true.
unfortunate because you end up with a situation where a lot of people who are not capable of taking on the responsibilities end up in those jobs. Yes, somebody wanted to make a contribution.
No, sir, I was saying
Yes,
that's true.
it's true. Yes, I've experienced it.
From in
Actually,
semi, that's true.
similar, same thing too. And you know, one of the problems that comes up with that too, Alana, you might be you might have seen this
So,
take place.
just let me interrupt you. I said public head is really one of the RECs.
Same thing as you inherited the public sector
Right,
service.
right,
Yeah.
okay, right.
All right. What ends up happening too is in a lot of instances, because I worked in the teaching service, and what we used to do is any teacher that gave a lot of trouble with students, we had a tendency to promote them into administrative positions, and I'll tell you why. Because a bad teacher does a lot of damage to students. And what one of the techniques that they used to do was to promote somebody out of the classroom so that it would minimize the impact of the negativity of that individual. And that's how you ended up with a lot of incompetent people who don't know how to teach or have very poor relationships with students, ending up in positions of authority and trying to run a department based upon their inability to teach. So, and that was something that happened in the department. In fact, it's referred to as Peter's principle. The more incompetence you exhibit, the greater the opportunities you have for promotion into the service. All right, so that's great. I like the contribution so far for
Sir,
that. Yes,
that is basically equating to failing upwards.
correct. Yes, that's the same thing. Back in the 70s, it was referred to as the Peters principle of incompetence, and what you call the last phrase you used there was what, Laura?
Failing upwards.
Failing upwards. Yeah, that's quite true. A lot of organizations attempt to minimize the fallout with the consumer or with their clients by putting the person higher up in the organization where their interface time with customers and clients is minimized. So, because they don't have proper grounds to dismiss them because of the antiquated system that is utilized for determining leadership, is based upon seniority. Because I know a lot of times we had situations where, welcome back, Jermaine. A lot of times we had a situation where whatever the head of department said, nobody really take them on. They do what they continue doing what they do because they know whatever they're talking about is rubbish. All right, Jermaine, you okay?
Sir,
Yes.
Yes, Miss.
I
Yes,
worked in,
Yes,
sorry,
Laura.
Jimmy.
Okay. Yes, Laura. Go ahead.
I was in state sector for nearly 14 years, coming out to
Uh-huh.
private, went to the states, gone back into private.
Mm-hmm.
And under private, yes, I do agree with quite a bit of the seniority thing happening. Also, the quote unquote nepotism also.
Correct. Yes. Who knows who kind of
But I've
situation.
also been under management who fit all the molds, did all of the management training, the leadership training, has a degree, has a master's,
Still
know
don't
the
make.
job,
Uh-huh.
left, studied, came back as a bigger manager, and was one of the most horrible managers to ever work under.
Yeah, and that's because whatever leadership program they did was not based upon, or they were never able to develop a positive leadership attitude. Now, in private sector, remember the focus is on measurement of the success of that leader is not measured in terms of the nature of the relationships that they develop with other people, but how well they get the job done, which is, make the most amount of money, make the most amount of profits. If you've ever looked at any of those movies that illustrate, like the I don't know if any of y'all ever looked at the movie about Steve Jobs. Their focus is always on being number one, being the best, but the relationships that they had with the people who they worked with was really poor. So they not necessarily they don't care about the relationships. In fact, he was estranged from his daughter all the way through that whole thing. If you ever look at the film on him, the autobiography that they did after he died, you'd see that kind of stuff being exhibited in that. Have a look at some of those films I've been talking about. Be some interesting things, but look at it in the framework of um, of evaluating the leadership styles that they talk about. Um, there's a film that focuses a little bit on that. Invictus. Anybody ever saw that film? And that was a film that
No, sir.
Invictus focused on two leaders. Um, it was Morgan Freeman was playing the role of
It is.
Mandela. Yes. As when he took over as the first president of South Africa, and the relationship he had with the leader of um, the rugby team, the South African rugby team that featured primarily white players, and that was a really interesting film. You should have a look at that because they talk a lot about leadership and leadership potential and techniques that they utilized in those in that particular movie. I think Mark Wahlberg, or was it the other one? I can't remember. I never get these guys differentiated. Not Mark Wahlberg. Um, one who does a lot of films with um,
So Matt
What's the
Damon.
name of the movie,
Matt
sir?
Damon in Invictus.
Evictus.
Invictus. INVICT. There's a watch named after it, or watch that has a similar name too. All right. So now what we want to look at is the model that we're going to be focusing on is referred to as the relational leadership model, and we're going to start looking at this in general at this point, and then we're going to get into more specifics by chapter 3. We'll be looking at it in a lot more detail. So the relational leadership model focuses on is going to draw a lot on the studies in psychology and education, and those frameworks require that we need to do certain things. First, we have to start with about learning about ourselves. Presentation one by you guys is about that chapter, understanding self. Self-awareness in the context of others, that's understanding others. That's presentation two. Understanding your personal values, beliefs, and commitments, that is presentation on chapter 6. So chapter 4, 5, 6 is all of these chapters here. So you all will be going into details about these things um, in a lot more details than I can do here, because these are the things that the framework focuses on. We need to know who we are, and we need to know who we are in the view or the context of other people. And we need to understand your own personal belief systems, which is the bedrock of your ethical values. So that leadership development, therefore, sits upon self-awareness, effective listening, collaboration, compromise, and practice, putting all these things into practice. Of this list here, the most difficult one to begin to achieve is effective listening. Now, why is that? What exactly is effective listening? Ashley, you're able to contribute? Ashley, how about RT? Wow. Okay.
So you can repeat the question.
What do you think effective listening is?
Listening and understanding
Mm-hmm. Listening and understanding what?
what you are to.
What you're being told. Okay. Um, are there any communication students in the class here with us?
Yes,
Any?
sir.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Who's that? Laurel?
Laura.
Okay. I'm gonna pick on you a little bit here. What you should have in your studies in communication, you doing mass communication, you should have come across this concept of effective listening. Yes.
Yes.
Right. And how was it defined from a technical point of view?
Sir, this was a very long time ago.
I know, but
I
it should.
can't remember the exact technical, but I can tell you it's listening to understand what is being conveyed or communicated to you.
Right. Now, in order to understand the other person's message, right, and what they're trying to tell you, one of the most important things you have to do is what? In terms of your own behaviors.
You need to not be distracted.
Okay, that's
You
that's
have to be
procedural,
focused.
right? So you have to
You have to be
focus on the
focused on the
individual.
individual.
Uh-huh.
And you also have to remove any type of bias
Right.
on whatever it is from your perspective.
Good. So what you're talking about is the most important and difficult aspect of effective listening, which is the suspension of judgment. You need to shut down your value structures, your biases towards the topic. You have to shut that down to be able to effectively listen to somebody. Now, this is easy to do if the person you're communicating with is somebody you like. More importantly, it's you're talking about something you both have some form of agreement with. But it becomes the most difficult when you are listening to people whom you don't quite like, and you're talking about something or some concept or idea that you are absolutely opposed to. So, can you give me, anybody here, an example of a topic that you could be discussing with somebody else, and they're trying to tell you, their problems, and you are making that kind of judgment system? Jada, you think you could give me an example of something like that? Or Mr. Batiste?
Sir, repeat your question.
Can you give me an example of a topic that you can find yourself being challenged to effectively listen to because of your own belief structures or your own biases?
Does it have to be specifically with leaders or at home?
Sorry, say that again?
Does it have to be specifically with leaders you work with or at home?
No, any situation will be fine.
I feel it would be disgusting doing chores at home
Really?
because some people will see it as that you have chores to do at home, but it's not exactly 100% important to do it right away. But your spouse would be arguing with you, do it now, do it now.
You mean the Nagan? Shivanan, you married?
No, sir.
That's why. Okay. All right. um, Actually, you've hit upon a very interesting thing, because one of the problems that we have with effective listening is we are unable to turn off how we feel about somebody when we're listening to them. And the bad thing about it is that we have problems listening effectively to people we have closer relationships with, because there's so much tension and that type of stuff that's going on there. It's easier to listen to a stranger than it is to listen to somebody with whom you have some sort of relationship, and it doesn't have to be a spouse or a love, that type of stuff, but it could be, listening to your son or your daughter talk about something that you don't want to hear them talk about at all. That's like mothers talking to daughters about um, their sexual activities, or the way they get their dress and the way they feel about their bodies and stuff like that, or fathers having that conversation as well with daughters and sons, or even talking about things that you like. For example, consider one of your children coming to you and telling you that they're bisexual or they're homosexual, and you just have no patience for that. You just want to slap the living daylights out of them. You understand what I'm talking about? Anybody that you have a close relationship with, it's even more difficult to effectively listen. And it becomes harder when you're talking about something with which you have a very strong dislike. So what Laurel was talking about was the most important aspect of listening effectively is to dismantle your value judgment system while listening to that person. I'm not saying you have to condone what they say, but while you are talking to that individual, you have to pull apart and stop judging the content and the messenger. You really have to just try and listen. That's why effective listening is a difficult exercise of the batch that is here. It's one of the most difficult ones and requires probably the most amount of practice. Okay, some other foundation principles of leadership are that leadership concerns us all. Now, this varies a lot because as we age, we can see the connection between decisions made by leaders and our day-to-day lives. Unfortunately, when we're younger, we kind of view leadership as that's not my business, that's older people business. But the fact of the matter is that regardless of how old we are, the behavior decisions and decisions made by leaders around us impact us directly. So their decisions are very critical. Consider, for example, your position in life, um, based upon the the decisions made by your parents during the process. Another idea here is that leadership is something that is viewed and valued differently by all. So while I may look at the importance of following the news and seeing what people are doing from a from political standpoint, like for example, looking at the budget speech and listening to those kind of things, I view that as being important. Other people will not look at it the same way, and I have to understand that and understand why. Another principle is that leadership is not something that's static, it has to be flexible because the environment in which we are operating is not something that remains the same. Different situations call for different styles of leadership, and we're going to engage in looking at some of those things. And we're going to be looking at the various techniques that are utilized because, um, again, the no one style is going to be appropriate in all settings and circumstances. And one of the critical ones is that leadership is something that can be learned and developed in individuals. It's not a genetic thing that somebody has based upon their birth and their parentage and that type of stuff, which is something that we also would examine as well. It requires that as a leader, we commit ourselves to very high ethical standards, and um, we have a high sense of social responsibility. Now we're going to come back to social responsibility in a little bit more detail, but it requires us to engage in critical thinking. It requires us to have high levels of credibility, authenticity, integrity, and of course, the highest ethical conduct. Now, all of these are very important. In fact, most of your programs, one of their critical learning outcomes is actually development of critical thinking. But the hardest ones is credibility, authenticity, and integrity. They're linked with each other. And once you damage your integrity or your credibility, it affects, it's like a domino effect. It takes years to build up people trusting that you are who you say you are, that you are a person who holds high ethical values. And all you need is one mistake, and everything comes crumbling down, regardless of what you may have done in the past. Everybody will judge you based upon the last thing you did. So if the last thing you did was something negative, people will always remember you for your worst, not for your best. Remember that, huh? Something that they talk about. Now, these principles that we talked about, the foundations, begins in a developmental process that starts with the knowing element. You must know yourself. So this is the self-analysis that we keep on talking about. You also need to understand how and why change occurs in the environment that you're working in the circumstances you find yourselves. And you also need to understand why other people see things differently to you. And you need to try to really get into their shoes. That leads us into a really interesting situation. Let's look at this picture here. What do you see? Let me ask Miss Maharaj. Aliyah, what do you see in this picture? Can you open your mic and speak?
Sure.
Right. So
Certainly.
what do you see?
Um, it's have a woman looking at herself. It's have a guy, but that picture where she looking, it's in like a skull,
A skull,
but then
right?
have is
Okay.
about like a dark.
What? Sorry, you're kind of breaking up a little bit.
It's looking like can we eye view to the back of the skull as well. That's view
Okay.
from that side.
All right. Everybody else is seeing that, Shivanan? Yeah, you seeing that?
Seen a
Yes, sir,
woman.
I seen a lady sitting in front of a mirror watching herself.
Uh huh.
I also see in the figure Pascal.
Right. Okay. Right. Other people are seeing those two images. You can just do a hands up if you want. Yeah, Mr. Batiste.
Yeah, I agree, sir. Yes, sir.
All right. Okay. So let's hold. Don't get carried away. All right. So let's look at this image here. Shivanan, your hands up. What do you see?
At first, I see a woman looking away,
All right.
and
So
I don't
stop
know if
right.
I'm seeing an old woman looking down.
All right. Okay. Good. So you're seeing two images there. A young woman looking away and an old woman looking down. Let's stop right there. How many people seeing those either one or both images? Or is any? I should ask a question. How many people not seeing one of those images? Kaylee, what are you seeing, Kaylee?
I'm seeing a young woman looking away.
Right. So you're not seeing an old woman looking down?
No, sir.
Anybody else in Kaylee position?
Same.
Yes, sir. And I see one person
Which one are you seeing, Laurel?
looking away.
A young lady looking over her shoulder, looking away. All right. So for those of you who, anybody else not seeing the old lady? Shivanan, you had to put your hand down because you see both.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, that's okay. Kaylee, anybody else?
Sir, I'm not seeing it.
You're now seeing it. Yeah, it takes some time. It takes some time and effort. So, for those of you still not seeing it, follow my instructions. Close your eyes first off for about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, open your eyes. Now, so far you're seeing this young lady. This is her hair. This is her eyes. She's looking over her shoulder. All of this is a coat. This is a hair tie over her hair. This is her ears. This is her chin. Correct? Now, close your eyes again. 5 seconds. 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000. Now, open your eyes. Let's look at this. Now, follow me here. This is an old lady looking down. This is her chin. This is her mouth. This is her nose. This is one eye. This is another eye just outside of her nose. This is the front of her hair. This is her head tie. This is a feather on the top of her head tie. And all of this hair, she's looking down into her coat. Right. Anybody seeing that now? This is her chin. This is her mouth. To follow my
Yes, sir.
mouth. Seeing it now?
So I see
Laurel?
it now, but
Yeah.
yes, I need to see it. I have to focus on where her chin is.
Right. And it takes time, it takes effort to do that, right? Now that you've seen both images, you can at will see them both ways. Huh? Hopefully.
Yes.
Anybody still not seeing the both images? Jermaine, which one are you seeing?
I'm seeing a person looking away. I'm not seeing the old lady yet.
All right. So Jermaine, remember what I told you. See where the remember the young lady has this thing tied around her neck like a neck thing and choker.
Yeah.
Right. That is the lips of the old woman. And this clear part here, that's the old lady's chin, sinking down into the coat. This part here is the old lady's nose, and this is the eyes. The ears of the young woman becomes the eyes of the old woman. One eye here, one eye here. This is
I'm
how.
seeing it now. I'm seeing it now.
Seeing it? All right. So you see it's just a matter of taking some time and
Yeah.
understanding the other position and seeing. Now this is indicative of the effort that is required for some of us to be able to understand other people's point of view, because this is 9 times out of 10, this is what's going on when we argue about something. It's because the only way you can see the the, the picture that the other person is seeing is that you need to go across by them, which means you have to kind of walk a mile in their shoes to be able to see things from their side. Because they're not, nobody's wrong here. It's just a matter of perception. From where he's standing, that's a 9. From where he's standing, that's a 6. And they're arguing about the same thing. And far too often, we find ourselves in positions where we are arguing based upon perceptions, and perceptions vary because of maybe just how we view things, past incidents, past influences, the broader knowledge base that one individual might have based upon another. And you have to remember that perception becomes their reality. And if we are arguing based upon the realities that everybody's seeing, then we're arguing um, futilely arguing this thing, right? So this is why it's important for us to understand why other people are seeing things the way they do, because we need to, if we have to work with people and develop good relationships, then we need to be able to develop that ability to see other people's positions and points of view, by seeing it from their position, and it takes time. It takes a lot of effort to do that. Second element of the three basic principles is the being part. So yes, we have that recognition, the knowing element, but you must be ethical, you must be principled, open, caring, and inclusive. Now, most difficult aspect of the being part is the open. Now, open, what does open mean to you? Cousin, what does that mean to you?
Being open mean like being open-minded to different topics, like
Different
different
positions.
cultures, like you're
Right.
open to different, to
Good.
something new,
Right.
diverse.
Or different, right? And more importantly,
Yes.
that openness has to be has to be combined with caring and inclusive. And that's
Yes.
where the challenge comes in. Because based upon how our lives have developed and the influences that we've had, we might find ourselves be not being able to be open to, let's say, working with somebody who's openly um, gay or bisexual or something along those lines. And it means that we build up this wall between
Bias.
them. Right, a bias, and we build a wall, and we really don't care about them as much as other people, and we don't actively include them in things. You might have found this practice like this taking place in school, in primary school. You'd see people who are similar tend to congregate. So
That
it
is
starts,
true.
right? It starts with girls in particular. They tend to be cliquey, and then there's this other girl who's different, and she's on a peripheral. They're on their own beat, that kind of stuff. They're loners in the classroom. Happens with guys too. It's not unique to the female, but it tends to be more recognizable and easily seen. So you have this clique
So
of
I find that people with similar qualities
mhm.
and gravitate to other people with the same qualities.
Yeah, well,
And
because like like what's the word, the phrase we use, like people generate gravitate towards each other because we see ourselves in each other, that type of stuff. We don't see ourselves in somebody that is diametrically opposed to you, which can start from a gender position and move to other areas. The challenge of the leadership developmental process is for us to be open, and not only open to all these different people around us, but also caring about them and including them in your decision making, including them in how you go about getting things done. That's going to be the challenge. Now, this quotation from this gentleman here, Richard Branston. Anybody recognizes this guy and knows what he's associated with?
He is the person who started it at United.
Sorry?
I can't remember the air. He started an
Vir-
airline.
Virgin Airlines, yes, and Virgin
Virgin.
Records, yeah.
Right. Sorry.
Right. Now he opened and failed many businesses, but is successful now because of some of the principles that he had. And I love this statement he makes here. Having a personality of caring about people is important. You cannot be a good leader unless you generally like people, and that is how you bring out the best in them. Now, this is something that I have found as a quotation or as a behavioral practice as a teacher. There are teachers who have unabashedly indicated that they don't like some students. And as a result of not liking them, for whatever reason, um, they would tend to treat them differently in the classroom. And I know that I have had encounters with teachers who openly show some level of disgust or bias towards one group of students as opposed to another group of students. And it shows in the relationship they develop, but more importantly, it impacts upon the performance of that student in the classroom. Um, and this is why when I saw this quotation, I felt it was really important that we talk about the fact that you work with people, you have to like them. It's important that you care about people that you're involved with, that you have some sort of relationship with them, and that's that open, caring, inclusive. That's important. Can't get things done without that. The last element here is the doing element. Um, you must act in a socially responsible manner. You must act that way consistently and congruently as a participant in your community and on your commitments and passions in your life. Now, consistently and congruently may sound like similar terms, but it means consistently means every time something happens, your behavior or your reaction or how you treat with it is the same thing over and over again, unless of course it was wrong in the first instance. Congruently would mean similar events, but in different aspects of your life or different circumstances, you also have consistent behavior there. So congruently and consistently has like a parallel type of impact that we're talking about here. And it has to be both in your private and your public life, as a participant in the community, as well as on your personal commitments and your passions in life. So your passions are things that are very personal to you. Um, so again, it's consistent behavior, high, good social responsibility action. Now I'm going to get into that. When we talk about social responsibility, we're talking about um, something that goes beyond just looking for profits, but the behavior of individuals that you get involved with being positive in its wide impact on the world. So consider, for example, some of the behaviors that we see as individuals in Trinidad and Tobago, where we don't see the social responsibility as from an individual position as opposed to corporate. So generally, when we talk about social responsibility, a lot of times we think about it from the corporate standpoint, but there's also personal social responsibility. So how many of us break the law by speeding, driving too fast in different zones, by littering, by throwing things on this alter your car windows and that kind of stuff. Um, Not looking after your home environment so that you are putting other people at risk in terms of like making sure that you're looking after the mosquito potential mosquito breeding potentials in your homes and that kind of stuff. All those type or these days when it comes to communicable diseases, blah, I haven't fixed that pronunciation. Um, like when you get sick, do you still go to work? You're not supposed to. That's being socially irresponsible because it means that you're likely to infect a whole pile of people, not just not just you, and so you're negatively impacting upon the environment and the world around you by not being socially responsible. So some of the things are very straightforward. and other things are not so straightforward. Okay. Now, despite the fact that we just identified these three steps, leadership cannot be a simple step one, step two, step three process. It it is a much more involved process of getting into this leadership development. And because of the nature of leadership, the approaches that we have to be utilized have to be realistic in nature. It has to influence the way you think, the your personal philosophies about leadership. Everything that you think and identify with is something that you're going to have to work on in terms of developing all the different elements that we're talking about so far. The ones that become the most critical are those core values that you have, because those core values reveal themselves uniquely when you are working with other people. Those core values become visible very easily when you start to work, because it it shows itself up very quickly. If you have poor core values or you have any kind of negative biases, it's going to show up real fast. So you have to be um, there's a lot of work is necessary. It's not a one and done deal. It's a never ending process of awareness that you have to be developing. So most times when we talk about developing any kind of um, new aspects to ourselves, is you kind of work hard to get it done. But the model is really saying to us, this paradigm that we have of hard work fixing all our problems is too simple in nature. And instead of working harder, we need to work smarter. In the model, when they talk about working smarter, they are referring to three forms of smarter working: collectively smarter, reflectively smarter, and spiritually smarter. So let's look at that. Collectively smarter recognizes the power of groups and teams, because the more perspectives you bring to bear on an issue or problem that's facing you as an organization or as a family, it provides for us more perceptions, more ideas, a richer source of raw data to be able to make a better and more informed decision. That's really the most important part of that. Recognize the strength of the group working together for a solution. All of us are smarter than one of us. It is not easy to do. It takes a lot longer to make a collective decision than it does to make an individual decision. But think
So
of
like
how.
a unity,
Sorry, say that again.
like unity.
Yes, at communities, yes, we're getting together and making decisions about it. Even in the smaller groups that you might get involved with in the college here. So like you have to work on a group project. It can't only be the perception of the person who thinks they're the smartest in the group, um, that that guides the entire project. The 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 project or the activity will be limited by the perspective of that one individual to the ignore, and you're going to ignore the input of everybody else. So that's important for us to remember. So when we talk about collectively smarter, we have to appreciate the strength of having more than one person looking at this problem. Reflectively smarter is one of those things that, given the pace at which we do work, it is hard to engage in this reflective process, taking time to make meaning out of what has happened in the past in order to gain perspective and understanding. Perspective and understanding in terms of what went right, what was wrong, what we can do to fix things, what we need to keep. A lot of and I try to engage in reflective practices, but it's very difficult because of the sheer speed at which work approaches you. And I'm sure all of us find ourselves challenged with that, because having moved from one semester to another, time and time again, you want to take some time off and kind of reflect on things. But if you're not getting the space to do it, it becomes very difficult. This leadership developmental process requires that we oftentimes take time to reflect on things. In fact, organizations have oftentimes in the past utilized retreats to engage in collective reflection, to look at teams and your departments in terms of how they work on things and so on. Important process, and if we were to do this more often, we would probably make better decisions because we would have utilized our past and our historic practice to inform on improved practice in the future. Spiritually smarter has nothing to do with religion, but it has to do on understanding what my and your core values are. Now, the easiest way to see somebody's true values or most important value structures is when things go wrong. So, being aware of the values and beliefs and principles that become your rudder in white or rough water, and that build your character. Now, this is something that you have to engage in from your own perspective because you need to reflect upon time frames that you engaged in. You had a lot of trouble. Things were going wrong all around you. What did you do, and how you went about doing things is going to be an important indicator as to what you value the most, or what are your core values. So if you were in a situation where you were in a really rough situation and you start to engage in some negative behavior, you're gonna find yourself, um, you know, meaning that some of your values that you may be exhibiting when things are going okay is not really true about you, and that's a form of self-evaluation that you're gonna have to engage in. You'll be surprised, what of the type of things that people do when they are down, when they're at their lowest points. They cheat, they steal, they lash out, they hit people, they get frustrated, and they first thing they do is, as they get frustrated, is lash out and yell at other people. Unfortunately, those of us who are closest to the individual are the ones who probably feel it the first, and they feel it the most. Consider your behavior when things go wrong, and you pay attention to what you've been doing. All right, something for you to think about. But spiritually smarter means that you are aware of what you really are. You're not fooling anybody because it's about you and what you do. Okay, that's something you want to pay attention to. Be aware of that. That is your key values that you're going to hold. Which is kind of like the question you want to do, if you know the world was going to end, what would you do? That's a question that kind of comes up in this circumstance. If you know the world was going to end in 48 hours or a week's time, what would you do? And that will show other people what your core values are. If you knew you were going to die in a week's time, what would you do? Those are the kind of things, you kind of questions, or hypothetical situations you're faced with, where it kind of indicates what you're going to be wanting to do. You ever came across those kind of social experiments where you find $1 million, and what do you do with it? Have you ever looked at there's this program that kind of focuses on these social experiments, and it's called What Would You Do? From CBS, I think they run it. It's available on YouTube. You can look at a couple episodes and see what would you do if this happens, and that kind of indicates what your core values are. And they tape these strangers getting involved with actors doing certain things. Anybody's aware of what I'm talking about? What would you do?
Yes, sir,
That's
I see that already.
yeah. Have a look at some of them for those of you who haven't, and position yourself there. What would you do? But the problem is, the you can only get a true reflection of of somebody's behavior when they are unaware that they're being observed. Because if you are aware that you're being observed, it it means that as an individual we modify our behaviors. That's something that psychology and sociology studies have to take into consideration. So what is a paradigm? We used that word before, as some people might have seen it there, and call it a paradigm, which is how it's spelled, but it's a paradigm. So paradigms are ways in which we look at things and how we try to understand them to make sense of them. We kind of examine some of your paradigms on leadership. Sometimes, however, when we look at the way in which we're looking at things, and we realize then that they're not fixing or addressing the issues that we're having, that indicates that we need to change that paradigm, that way of thinking. And that's where we move to a paradigm shift. So, which means another phrase that you may have heard in the past, paradigm shifting. So, a paradigm shift means that we have to change the way in which we think about things and how we go about trying to find solutions for these things. So, what are some examples of this? So, I have a couple of things. For example, we have to do paradigm shifting when it comes to crime in Trinidad and Tobago. We can't continue doing the same thing over and over and expect to get some solution out of it. Because as far as I can see, we haven't really done any kind of paradigm shifting when it comes to that. Can you think of anything else in the world around us, in our environment, that paradigm shifting may be required? Anybody who wants to open up and just indicate what they think needs. I've suggested one that how we look at crime requires some sort of definite paradigm shift. Anybody? Nicole?
To war around the world.
Right, our approach to
I
peace.
can
Is that
understand the
right?
thing.
Okay, yeah, that might be something. But what about in Trinidad? Do you see anything else that might need that for us to work on? Tamika? No? Rana? What about you? Anything else? All right, so this is one that comes up in terms of leadership. Paradigm shift here in leadership is leadership is not about something a leader does as much as it's a process that involves what we do with other people, involves followership. So the phrase is leadership is not something a leader possesses so much as a process involving followership. Followership is really leadership and action among people in groups. That's a paradigm shift because far too often the the leadership models and programs that we tend to meet, and some these are some of the more expensive, um, involved programs out of large universities. The focus is on what the leader does and how the leader should do things, and it does not pay sufficient attention to the relationship and the process of developing that relationship with the followership. So this is one of the paradigm shifts that in this model that we're looking at, a lot of the focus is not on the leader, but on what followers do. Now, when we talk about followers, we can start to evaluate our followers based upon a number of different scenarios or circumstances. So in this model here, which comes from the textbook, it gives us a matrix in which we're looking at on the y-axis, we're looking at relationship initiatives, and on the x-axis, we're looking at their performance initiatives. Now, consider those little group projects that you've been doing for God knows how long in Costart. Position yourself where you think you are. Have you been a subordinate where you have low relationship initiatives and low performance initiatives? Are you a contributor where you don't like to get involved in the the presentation element and the talking to everybody, and getting things done, but you're really good on doing the research and writing up the project, or are you a partner? You're high on both axes, and therefore become almost a challenge for the leader to manage you. Or are you a politician? You're real good with the presentation and talking, but you're really bad in terms of pulling the work together, that kind of stuff. Where do you fall, and what do you do as a leader in a circumstance like this? So basically, if I was a leader and I had a bunch of people and they were categorized in these areas, I know that combining partners with subordinates was going to be an important strategy I can utilize to be able to get somebody who was really independent and good at their work to be able to pull people from the subordinate groupings to be able to get the work done, because they need guidance, they need help. They're not going to do anything without being told to do it. That's the type of action that's going to happen here. Similarly, I will pair politicians and contributors together, because contributors naturally shy away from the limelight and from the communication element and reaching out and being, more extroverted in their um, extrovert activities make them tired, and they shy away from it as opposed to the politician. So you combine the politician with the contributor. So the contributor will do the basically what you call the grunt work, and then the politician will handle the relationship development, the communication activities, the actual presentation itself. So again, what this model is saying, that as a leader, if you can evaluate the people in your group, the followers in your group, and you evaluate them this way, this is one way you can evaluate them so that you'll be able to get the best out of the group of individuals based upon where they fall into this category. Another evaluation technique you can utilize, and this is one that is more utilized in a political environment, is the Hyacinth model. So again, you have the leader, but you have seven different types of followers: critics, sycophants, opportunists, spectators, etc. Basically, what you're going to be doing here is, once you evaluate where people fall into your different groups, you can one, how to treat with those individuals and what behaviors you expect from them, and then you can put them together with other people from different groupings to be able to control what's going on. This is especially where you want to pay attention to people who are traitors in your cause, kind of thing. You know, want to combine them with some loyalists to try and monitor what's going on, make sure that they control the flow of information, so that those people are going to be you know monitored. Realists are important because realists will tell the leader what is what you know what the reality is, and not just get jaded by loyalists, for example, who might be only willing to talk about all the good things. You have to manage your opportunists. You have to manage the sycophants, um, and the critics are only have negative things to say, so you might want to take take what they have to say with a grain of salt, kind of situation, and probably use a realist to help, remove the negative from the positives there. So that's another method that you could utilize to evaluate your followers, to be able to do that. Now, to be able to do these things, these are the responsibilities of followers. They need to be able to offer support to the leader, to take initiative and not wait on the leader to tell them what to do, to be a counselor and a coach both to other members or other followers as well as the leader themselves, because as we would see later on, the leader is not going to know everything, and therefore they require the assistance of followers to get the best out of them as well. Coaching roles and counseling roles are important. Raise issues and concerns when necessary. This is especially important where the leader may be doing things that are not necessarily congruent with the objectives of the organization, or congruent with the way in which the organization wants to present itself. So those are things that a follower needs to do. That a lot of leaders don't like this. They don't like to be told, "Hey, you're doing rubbish. You need to sort this out. You can't be doing that." Seek and encourage honest feedback, and that's another thing that a lot of us tend to run from as followers in organizations. We don't like or we don't really seek honest feedback because we are afraid of negative news. We only want to hear good things, both from a leader point of view as well as a. We only want to know the best things. We don't want to know the worst things. Clarify your rules and expectations. That's important because if you're following an organization, you need to know what is expected of you and what role exactly you're going to be. So you don't get involved in activities that are not important. Show appreciation. This goes both ways. Leaders have to show appreciation to followers, and followers need to show appreciation to leaders. That's important. Keeping the leader informed is a really important aspect because the leader cannot make good decisions if they don't have all of the information. And the last one here is really important. They have to resist inappropriate influences of the leader. That's important because a lot of leaders who have a more maximum leadership style don't want to hear what anybody else has to say about their behavior. And this leads to problems in organizations when leaders behave in a particular manner and eventually cause problems in the future. We'll see some of that when we get into um, looking at the leadership models in the future. All right. Now, to be able to get those responsibilities done, the followers have these competencies. They have to have the ability to display loyalty, both visually as well as within within themselves. Function well in change environments, which means they have to be dynamic in their actions. They need to work well with teams and groups. They have to be independent and critical thinkers. A lot of leaders don't like independent people in their groups because they prefer sheep because they're easier to manage. So true followers need to be independent, critical thinkers. And of course, they all need to think of integrity as being really important for the organization. So that's really important. Have high levels of ethical values is going to be critical across the board. So if those are the kind of behaviors that we're talking about for a follower, do you think follower is the best phrase or term we could use for them? Anybody willing to suggest an alternative to follower? What could be utilized? Aaliyah? Cousin? Anybody? What's another
Oh,
phrase?
I don't want game, but I say like you have different qualities,
Quartz?
like different qualities.
Yeah, but what was a name we could call them?
Hmm.
Instead of calling them a follower. You have this, you're the leader of our
Um,
organization, so these are my followers. What's another phrase that we could use? Because follower sounds a little derogatory, I
Team
know.
the
member.
word
Member,
subservient.
All
team
right, so I
member.
had team member. Great. Somebody else was saying something else.
Since subservient.
Say again.
I think it's called subservient or
Sub
subservience.
subservient. No, no, that's a bad name. We're trying to get away from that subordinate type feeling. We're trying to give them a name like what they're talking about, team members, um, associates, or partners,
Colleagues.
colleagues. All right. So those are better terms that we can utilize to describe followers with those types of competencies and those types of responsibilities. That's what we're talking about there. So, unfortunately, when we start to look at followers, there's a tendency to have this type of thing here. This is the Kelly model or Kelvy model. Um, and I want you to look at this in the context of political parties. So you have on the both axes, you're looking at the level of activities or action based from being active to passive, and then their ability to engage in critical thinking and independent thinking from being highly independent, highly critical to being absolutely dependent and uncritical thinking. Now, different types of leaders prefer different types of followers. So in a political party, for example, much like what we looked at before, you have sheep, yes people, effective followers, and alienated followers. So here we can see the sheep, they do nothing unless they're told to do it, and they have very low critical thinking skills. So they're just kind of highly dependent on everybody else to tell them what to do, as well as interpret what's going on around them. Yes, people are highly active in the organization, but again, they lack critical thinking. All right, these are uh, sort of like the soldiers. The yes people are your soldiers. The sheep are the people you need to be corralling all the time and to get things done. Effective followers are highly independent and critical thinkers and highly active in the organization. This is where you really want most people to be. Question is, as a leader, would you be able to tolerate them? When people become frustrated with the system around them, um, um, especially if they're effective followers, they can migrate across to alienated followers. That means they begin to walk away from the organization, walk away from decision making because they no longer care, um, or trust the organization. Now, if we were to look at elections turnout, a lot of voters are alienated by both parties that exist in the country or the political systems that exist in the country. Where you find, I mean, one election recently I was looking at, recent is a relative term, the participation rate was less than 40% in that thing, which meant that 70 to 80% of the country were in the alienated area. That's a dangerous place to be because what that means is that a minority of people chose leadership based upon um, based upon 30% of the population chose the leaders for an entire organization, of which 80% of the people or 70% of the people just decided just it makes no sense because there's no um, alternative that seems to be available, and that unfortunately tends to be a scenario that presents itself not only here but internationally. People have just gotten um, kind of they look at the environment that they're in. They're not seeing any distinct difference between any of the leadership potential around them, and they just said that, hey, listen, it's six of one, half a dozen of another kind of thing. I mean, I know I've been in that era. I have for a long time been looking at that the political circumstances in our country, and it really doesn't matter who's in power. The same thing happens time and time again. I haven't seen much effective change taking place in around us. Same, sort of like was it SSDD? Same shit, different day. Kind of situation. I don't know how you all feel about it, but I know that level of alienation is dangerous in a population because it can breed a lot of social unrest if that level of discontent starts to grow. All right. As we talked about before, we talked about the followers, now we talk about the leaders. And these were the different leadership styles that we were talking about in terms of the approaches to leadership that can be utilized. The classical approaches, be laissez-faire, autocratic, or participative. Situational, where you have leadership emerging based upon the situation that presents itself. Um, Emergent, meaning that leaders emerge out of the organization based upon either their position, their training, and so on. Transactional is a style of leadership where the leader utilizes transactional techniques to get people to do things. You do this, you get paid. You do this, you get a bonus. That type of stuff. Transformational leadership styles or techniques would be where the leader tries to impress upon people the importance of making certain types of changes in the organization, and you're transforming the organization from one type of activity or one type of behavior into another. This one requires a lot of motivational approaches. It's a longer process. It requires a lot more effort. And visionary types is where the leader is able to paint very graphic, vivid pictures of a vision or a journey that the organization can take, or a place it can get to by painting this picture of this idyllic position for us to aspire towards. So those are different techniques. Now it's not that you have different leaders utilizing different techniques, but there are different techniques that are available for one leader to utilize based upon the circumstances they find themselves looking at. um, Transformational and visionary tend to have some similar um, um, qualities that are required, but there's a distinct difference because a visionary may be a really good. So I've worked with good visionary people, and good visionary people need to bring on transformational leaders because the vision is easily seen, clear, and that kind of stuff. But a visionary leader is good at the macro view of things, but then they can't manage the micro day-to-day transactional and transformational process required to get the organization to move there. So they it's not that it's mutually exclusive, but generally visionary leaders have problems with the day-to-day activities of the organization. So the leader is anybody who is actively engaging with others to accomplish change. That's the definition coming from the model that we're looking at. The purpose of that leader is to motivate employees, attain the goals of their organization, ensure that whatever rules exist in the organization that they're followed, provide continuity and momentum in the journey towards the change that you're trying to get. Um, Continuity meaning that there's a connection between what went in the past to what's coming up, and that some sort of urgency is maintained to continue the process of change. The leader also has to be able to embrace um, and foster change, because you as a leader need to be able to do that if you want other people to do so. Um, they have to do things for the common good. They have to exhibit high levels of social responsibility, high levels of civic engagement, and high levels of civic responsibility. So we're going to get into a little more details about that. We spoke about social responsibility before. That is what we do that and the impact it has on everybody around us, our immediate community, our environment, and the world around us. So that's an important element that we talked about there before. Civic engagement is a heightened sense of responsibility for all communities that we work in, that we engage in from a social perspective, that we engage in from a family perspective, and the community that we live in. It's really weird because there are a lot of us operate in a way in which we focus heavily on work and family, but we don't really focus on the community we actually live in. Primarily because we spend most of our day and time at work, and we don't really have a lot of time and energy to put out when we get into the community. Get back home. When you get back home, it's just really, I just want to go and sleep. I want to rest, focus on what has to be done in my household, and you're not really looking on. But good leaders, or to be a good leader, you need to have a heightened sense of civic engagement as well. So when we talk about civic engagement, here we're talking about volunteering for communities activities, um, engaging in civil skills such as getting involved in political movements, encouraging democratic activities, developing a sense of reciprocity and trust in your organization. That's going to be really important for you to be looking at as you move forward in terms of civic engagement. When we talk about civic responsibility, it's about our personal responsibility that we should feel to uphold our obligations as part of our community. So what does that mean? That means these things here. So actions that are required by law, and actions that we should be taking as citizens. So any of you all ever did these things? Jury duty. How many of y'all don't do? Well, all of you all are going to school. Those are things, actions required by law. Obeying the law. Well, this is especially when it comes to driving. I can't say anybody here who's a driver has always obeyed the law. I'm pretty certain that at some point in time we've broken the law. Whether or not we got caught is a different issue. Paying taxes, that's something that a lot of people in our country we don't actually do. We don't pay our taxes to the country. Engaging in community service. Some people don't vote. Service in the military, that's something that usually um, it's not part of our response. Though a lot of our population does serve in the military, it's not something that is widespread. Displaying patriotism. We are real funny when it comes to patriotism. The only time you usually show patriotism is when things good. When things bad, forget about it. We have a very poor sense of patriotism when it comes to our country. All right, so that brings us to this leadership and learning, and I've spoken about this before. Should leaders know everything? And the answer to that is no. And if the leaders is not expected to know anything, leaders and leadership requires an openness to learning. And we have to recognize that part of that learning process is to learn as a group. And the reason why we have to learn as groups, that's the leader and followers together, is because all of us are smarter than one of us. That's the collective smarter thing that we talked about before. The group, as well as the leader, needs to make sure that the environment is open to learning, making mistakes, and sharing knowledge. Now, a lot of older types of leaders do not like to see themselves or be seen as lacking in information or lacking in knowledge. So, therefore, they would not admit to um, needing um, needing any sort of additional training or learning. They don't tolerate mistakes, and more importantly, they don't share knowledge because keeping that knowledge is power for them. It ensures that they have um, control over everybody else because they have the required information, but they're keeping it there and only doling it out in small doses to be able to control what's taking place. Now, that's a real cynical approach to leadership that the model that we're looking at is not going to encourage. It's going to encourage openness to learning, making mistakes. That's something that's important. I mean, you don't want to be making critical mistakes, but at the same time, if you're not allowed to make a mistake and recover, then there's no way for you to learn because that's how we learn. We learn by doing something and then trying it again to do it better, which means we have to allow for mistake making. So this is one of the learning models. This comes from straight from the textbook. That for us to be able to learn things, it whatever it is has to be part of our focus. We have to be willing to do it, and we have to develop the capacity to do it. That's the only way we're going to be able to do things in terms of learning. All right. So we have to get those three circles to intersect with each other. Now, another approach to or model that we could look at is this system here, which is very similar to the scientific methodology of learning, which is you start by conceptualizing some concept or idea, you apply it, you make observations in the experience, um, you reflect on it, and you either go back and do what is called critical inquiry. What went right? What was wrong? Do I need to rethink this? You could either go back here to conceptualize and reapply and come back and go through this process. But if it works and everything works out well, it joins the body of existing theories and is put into practice in the wider environment. So the scientific process is or hypothesis testing, which is what is referred to, is this technique that kind of comes from this system that we're looking at here. All right, now some of the most effective organizations are learning communities. Those learning communities are really important. So if you think of Google, for example, and Costat, for example, another one, in our mission and vision statement, we talk about the creation of lifelong learners because those organizations stay relevant to the world around them because they're constantly in a learning mode. As things change, as things move along, the organization and its membership encourages ongoing learning, and that's really going to be important. I've seen this happen a lot in our organization, especially when new technology comes up or new techniques come up. We get together quickly and we try to go through the learning process. We get each other to go through these things and share the learning. I've even had presidents come down of the college come down and participate in the learning activities alongside us, where we're learning together, and, and it really helps to make us feel, as one kind of thing, because we're all learning together, making mistakes together. It's a really powerful thing when a manager or the VP of an organization is down in the trenches with the everybody. It creates a sense of morale and uh, a sense of togetherness that you can't create without that activity of learning together. All right. An important element of learning is experiential learning, which is the way in which we come about one of the methods that we utilize in terms of coming to understand new things, which is either by doing something or by thinking about it. The concrete experience versus the abstract conceptualization. Um, that process of reflecting on it and then applying it, that is experimentation. And the easiest way is to see it in this format here. We start with conceptualization or we start with the experience. Either one leads us into a set of activities. So if you think about something, let's say you're thinking about learning to play the guitar. So you kind of see yourself doing it. You get a guitar and you start to practice and you engage in some active thing. You take your concrete experience that you go through and you make some reflection on it and you realize, okay, I have to think about this a little longer. This I may need to get more help. You get that help, you experiment, you get a concrete experience, and you go on. Experiential learning is probably the most important method of learning that exists, and it's really one of the most powerful learning techniques that exists outside there. You can see this with children in particular. They learn things faster by doing rather than by abstract. And this is one of the issues that faces us in our education system. A lot of the learning that is expected to take place in a child and in the education system is through conceptualization only. But we can marry both the abstract and the concrete experiences together. It'll be a much stronger learning environment. Allowing for, of course, errors and mistakes to take place is going to be important. So as we're wrapping up this chapter, we are going to be looking at um, the in the next two presentations. I'm going to be looking at the evolution of leadership theory um, over the years that is developed in the next chapter, and then we're going to look at the relational leadership model in chapter 3 in a lot more detail as we move forward. So I want to leave you with these couple of quotations here. This one's taken directly from the text by this student, Chandra Johnson, where she is quoted as saying, leadership is a role open to anyone. Leadership is living by a personal set of rules in which you motivate others to do the right thing, be engaged in the world, and to listen to others and their concerns. Leadership is focused on the other person. I found this was a really nice quotation coming out of the text. And this last one here, leadership is not the privilege of the few. You and I can and should be leaders. So I know we have a lot of work left to do. Um, so I want you to I know, just you don't have to memorize things here. What I want you to do is, if you want to go through this by yourself, kind of, pull out the things that stick to you, and um, the things, that come out to you, and you could utilize it in your reflections and that type of stuff moving forward. All right. Anybody has any questions or comments they want to make as we're wrapping up for the evening? Observations, anybody? Yes, not at this time. Okay, I hear you. All right. Let me stop the recording, and I'll put this recording up for people who are absent, um, to be able to, get an idea of what took place.